For 72 hours, Tehran said absolutely nothing. No press conferences, no state television addresses, no foreign ministry briefings. Not a single statement from the Supreme National Security Council. The satellite imagery told a different story. IRGC transporter erector launchers, TELs, repositioning across western Iran. Fateh 313 solid-fuel short-range ballistic missiles loaded onto mobile platforms. Fuel trucks staged at forward operating positions in Kermanshah and Elam provinces. And then, the footage that every intelligence analyst in Washington, London, and Tel Aviv watched on a loop. A convoy of Qiyam-1 liquid-fueled missiles moving under camouflage netting toward the Iraqi border at 0200 local time. Then, this morning, at approximately 0347 Baghdad time, a missile, launched from Iranian territory, struck the compound of the United States Embassy in Baghdad, the largest American diplomatic facility on Earth. A 104-acre fortress in the Green Zone, a $750 million symbol of American power in the Middle East. And what followed was not reassurance. It was not de-escalation. It was not a measured diplomatic response. It was the sound of every assumption about Iranian deterrence collapsing in a single impact. There are 5 things about this strike that every analyst, every policymaker, and every military strategist is focused on right now. Number 1, this was not a proxy attack. This was a missile launched from Iranian soil. Number 2, the target was not a remote military outpost. It was the single most protected American diplomatic compound in the world. Number 3, Tehran has not denied responsibility. They have not blamed rogue elements. They have not issued a correction. Number 4, the missile used was not an improvised rocket. Intelligence assessments point to a Fateh-class or Qiyam-1 short-range ballistic missile, a weapon system with a separating warhead specifically designed to defeat missile defense. And number 5, the timing. This strike came exactly 11 days after the United States expanded sanctions on Iran's ballistic missile program, and 48 hours after an Israeli airstrike killed a senior IRGC Quds Force commander in Damascus. That 5th point, that convergence of timing, is the reason I am making this video today. Because what we are witnessing is not an isolated incident. It is the opening move in a sequence that has been building for months, and the next 72 hours will determine whether this becomes the most dangerous military confrontation in the Middle East since the 1991 Gulf War. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This situation is moving faster than anything I have covered in 15 years of geopolitical analysis. What happens in the next 48 hours will determine whether American forces engage Iran directly for the first time since 1988. You need to be here when the next development breaks. Quick context first. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is not just an embassy. It is a city within a city. At 104 acres, nearly the size of Vatican City, it is the largest diplomatic compound the United States has ever constructed. 21 buildings, blast walls rated for rocket-propelled grenades and mortar fire, deep-layered security perimeters with motion sensors, closed-circuit surveillance, and 5 controlled access points. At its peak in 2012, this facility housed 16,000 employees and contractors, per Congressional Research Service records. Even after drawdowns reduced staffing to approximately 350 by mid-2020, the embassy remains the nerve center for every American military, intelligence, and diplomatic operation in Iraq. This is not a soft target. This is the hardest target in the entire Middle East. And Iran hit it anyway. Let me walk through this the way analysts are walking through it right now. The missile trajectory, based on early radar tracking data shared with Allied intelligence services, indicates a launch point in western Iran, most likely from the Kermanshah or Elam province corridor. That corridor is significant. It places the embassy within the 500-kilometer operational envelope of the Fateh 313 and well within the 800-kilometer range of the Qiyam-1. Both systems are operated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force, the IRGCAF. The Fateh 313 is a solid-fueled, road-mobile ballistic missile. It does not require lengthy fueling procedures. It can be transported, erected, and launched in under 15 minutes. The Qiyam-1 is a liquid-fueled derivative of the Scud family, but with a critical modification. Unlike its predecessors, the Qiyam-1 has no stabilizing fins. Instead, it uses a separating warhead, a re-entry vehicle that detaches from the booster in terminal phase, making it significantly harder for theater missile defense systems like Patriot PAC-3 to intercept. Let me repeat that. The IRGC specifically developed and deployed a missile designed to penetrate exactly the kind of defense systems that protect the U.S. Embassy compound. That is not a coincidence. That is a capability demonstration. And the question every analyst is asking right now is not whether this missile hit the compound. We know it did. The question is whether the CRAM, counter-rocket artillery mortar system, and the Patriot batteries positioned in and around the green zone engaged the incoming missile at all. Because if they did engage and failed to intercept, that changes the strategic calculus for every American base, every carrier strike group, and every forward-deployed asset in the Central Command area of responsibility. If they did not engage, if the missile arrived with insufficient warning for engagement, that is even worse. Let me be very precise about why this strike represents a categorical shift in Iranian behavior. Since October 2023, Iran-backed proxy forces, primarily the umbrella coalition known as the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which includes Kataib Hezbollah, Asaib al-Haq, Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, and at least a dozen other militias, have carried out over 180 attacks against American forces across Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. 180 separate incidents in approximately 14 months. Drones, rockets, one-way attack munitions, short-range ballistic missiles fired from Iraqi and Syrian territory. In January 2024, a single drone attack on Tower 22, a logistics support base near the Jordan-Syria border, killed 3 United States Army soldiers, Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Specialist Breonna Moffett. 3 Americans. Killed by an Iranian-designed, Iranian-supplied unmanned aerial vehicle operated by an Iranian-backed militia. That attack nearly triggered a direct U.S.-Iran confrontation. President Biden ordered retaliatory strikes against IRGC-linked targets in Iraq and Syria. B-1B Lancer bombers flew from the continental United States. 85 precision-guided munitions hit 7 facilities across 2 countries. The message was supposed to be clear. There is a price for killing Americans. But today's strike is different. And here are the 3 reasons why. Reason 1. State attribution. Every previous attack since October 2023, every single one, was carried out by proxy forces, militias, non-state actors, groups that Tehran could plausibly deny direct operational control over. That deniability was the entire architecture of Iran's regional strategy. It is the foundation of the axis of resistance doctrine. Use proxies to impose costs on adversaries without triggering a direct state-versus-state conflict. Today, that architecture collapsed. This missile was launched from Iranian territory, not from Iraqi militia positions in western Anbar, not from Syrian launch sites near al-Bukamal, from Iran. The IRGC did not subcontract this operation. They executed it. And that distinction, proxy versus state, is not a technicality. It is the single most important variable in determining whether this escalates to a direct military confrontation between the United States and Iran. Under international law, under the United Nations Charter, Article 51, a missile launched from the territory of a sovereign state against the diplomatic compound of another sovereign state constitutes an armed attack. It triggers the inherent right of self-defense. It obligates a response. Reason 2. Target selection. Iran-backed militias have hit U.S. military bases. They have hit logistics hubs. They have hit remote outposts with skeleton crews. They have targeted the periphery of American presence in the Middle East. Today, Iran hit the center. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is not a military installation. It is sovereign American territory under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Striking it is not just an act of war against American military forces. It is an act of war against the American state, against American sovereignty, against the principle, accepted by every nation in the modern international system, that diplomatic facilities are inviolable. The last time a U.S. embassy was directly attacked by state-level military action, it was 1979. Tehran, the hostage crisis. 444 days that destroyed a presidency, reshaped American foreign policy, and defined U.S.-Iran relations for half a century. That comparison is not hyperbole. It is the framework through which every decision-maker in Washington is processing this event right now. Reason 3. The weapon system. A Katyusha rocket fired from a truck bed in the desert is a nuisance. It is a harassment tool. It forces base personnel into bunkers. It occasionally damages equipment. It very rarely kills. A Fateh 313 or Qiyam-1 ballistic missile is a strategic weapon. It carries a warhead weighing between 450 and 650 kilograms. It travels at speeds exceeding Mach 4 in terminal phase. It has a circular error probable, the radius within which 50% of warheads will land, of less than 100 meters on modern variants. Some variants reportedly achieve CEPS under 30 meters with terminal guidance corrections. Iran did not fire a warning shot. Iran fired a weapon designed to destroy hardened infrastructure. That is not signaling. That is targeting. Drop a comment right now. I want to know what you think the U.S. response will be. A proportional strike? An asymmetric escalation? Or something we have not seen in this region since Desert Storm? I read every single comment. I want to know what you think before I show you the intelligence assessments and expert analyses. Because after you see them, your answer might change. Let me be fair. Let me present the strongest possible case for restraint and de-escalation. Because there are serious analysts, people I respect, making that case right now. The missile hit a section of the compound, early reports suggest the helipad area, that was unlikely to have significant personnel presence at 0347 local time. If Iran wanted to kill Americans, they could have targeted the residential quarters, the operations center, or the chancery itself. They chose a peripheral target. That suggests this was a demonstration, not an assassination attempt. A political message inside a military envelope. Iran's economy is under extraordinary pressure. Inflation exceeded 40% in the last 12 months. The rial has lost over 60% of its value against the dollar since 2020. Oil revenues, Iran's fiscal lifeline, are constrained by sanctions enforcement, even as crude prices surge past $110 per barrel. A full-scale war with the United States would be economically catastrophic. Tehran knows this. The strike may be designed to force Washington to the negotiating table, not to provoke a military response that would devastate Iran's already fragile infrastructure. In January 2020, after the United States killed IRGC Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani in a drone strike at Baghdad International Airport, Iran's response was a ballistic missile barrage against Ain al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq. Over a dozen missiles hit the base. Dozens of U.S. service members suffered traumatic brain injuries, but no Americans were killed. And crucially, despite enormous political pressure, neither side escalated further. The cycle broke. Both capitals claimed victory and moved on. These are reasonable arguments. They are grounded in evidence. They reflect a logical assessment of Iranian strategic interests. But here is the problem with the optimistic interpretation. Every single one of these arguments assumes that Iran is operating from the same strategic playbook it has used for the past 2 decades. Proxy warfare, calibrated escalation, strategic patience, the maximum pressure without maximum provocation doctrine that characterized IRGC operations under Soleimani and his successor, Brigadier General Esmail Qani. And what this strike tells us, what the targeting, the weapon selection, the launch origin, and the timing collectively tell us, is that the playbook has changed. Iran did not use a proxy. Iran used its own military. Iran did not hit a military outpost. Iran hit an embassy. Iran did not fire an unguided rocket. Iran fired a ballistic missile with terminal guidance. Iran did not time this randomly. Iran timed this to coincide with maximum geopolitical tension, post-sanctions expansion, post-Israeli strike on an IRGC commander in Damascus, and amid accelerating militia operations across Iraq and Syria that have claimed over 30 attacks in a single 72-hour period. When you change the actor, the target, the weapon, and the timing, all at once, you are not calibrating within an existing framework. You are establishing a new one. And the new framework is this: Iran is willing to directly attack American sovereign territory with state-level military assets. That is not escalation management. That is escalation dominance. And it requires a fundamentally different American response. This is not just a geopolitical story. It is already in your gas tank, in your grocery bill, in your mortgage rate, in your retirement account. Let me show you the chain. An Iranian ballistic missile strikes the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Within 30 minutes, Brent crude futures, the global benchmark for oil pricing, spike. As of this recording, Brent is trading above $118 per barrel. West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. benchmark, is above $112. Those numbers represent increases of 8% and 9% respectively in a single trading session, in a single morning. Why? Because the oil market is pricing in one word: Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, between Iran and Oman. Every single day, approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil transit through that strait. That is nearly 20% of global oil consumption. Nearly 30% of all seaborne crude shipments. The single most important choke point in the global energy system. Iran controls the northern shore. The IRGC Navy operates fast attack craft, mines, and anti-ship cruise missiles throughout the strait. And Tehran has stated, repeatedly, explicitly, on the record, that any military confrontation with the United States would result in the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The International Energy Agency has already modeled this scenario. If Hormuz flows are disrupted, even partially, Global oil supply drops by 8 to 10 million barrels per day. Supply that cannot be replaced by strategic petroleum reserves, which the IEA estimates at approximately 400 million barrels across member nations, enough to cover roughly 40 days of the shortfall, not 40 months. Goldman Sachs published an analysis estimating that a sustained disruption to Hormuz transit would push Brent crude to between $130 and $150 per barrel. In extreme scenarios, full closure, extended duration, some models project prices exceeding $200. Now, let me bring that down to your kitchen table. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, estimates that every $10 increase in crude oil prices translates to approximately 25 cents per gallon at the pump. Brent has already surged over $15 in the past 72 hours. That is a direct mechanical increase of roughly 37 to 40 cents per gallon of gasoline. For a family driving 2 cars, filling up once a week each, that is an additional $40 to $50 per month, just from this week's events. Before any further escalation. But gasoline is only the beginning of the chain. Diesel, the fuel that moves every truck, every train, every container ship in the American supply chain, tracks crude oil even more closely than gasoline. When diesel prices rise, transportation costs rise. When transportation costs rise, the price of everything that moves, food, building materials, manufactured goods, medical supplies, rises with them. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimated that the 2022 oil price spike, driven by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, contributed approximately 1.2 percentage points to U.S. consumer price inflation. That spike took Brent from $78 to $128 over 3 months. We are watching a comparable price movement unfold in 3 days. Coface, the global trade credit insurer, warned in their most recent risk assessment that a sustained $15 increase in Brent crude could reduce global GDP growth by 0.2 percentage points and add nearly 0.5 percentage points to inflation. That combination, lower growth and higher inflation, has a name: stagflation. The economic condition that central banks fear more than anything else, because there is no monetary policy tool that can simultaneously stimulate growth and suppress inflation. The Federal Reserve had been signaling rate cuts. Markets had priced in at least 2 25 basis point reductions before year-end. Those expectations are now being repriced in real time. If oil-driven inflation accelerates, the Fed cannot cut. If the Fed cannot cut, mortgage rates stay elevated. If mortgage rates stay elevated, the housing market, already frozen by affordability constraints, stays frozen. If housing stays frozen, construction activity declines. If construction declines, the 7.8 million Americans employed in the construction sector face reduced hours and layoffs. That is a direct line from a missile impact in Baghdad to a paycheck in Topeka, Kansas. That is a direct line from a TEL launcher in Kermanshah Province to an interest rate decision at the Eccles Building on Constitution Avenue. That is a direct line from an IRGC commander's order to the grocery bill sitting on your counter right now. Hit like if this breakdown is useful to you. I spent 14 hours going through intelligence assessments, oil market data, Federal Reserve communications, and military capability analyses, so you get the structural picture instead of just the headline. The like button tells the algorithm this kind of coverage matters. 2 seconds. Helps enormously. And subscribe. Turn on notifications. I will be here the moment anything breaks on this crisis. Let me bring in the people whose job it is to assess exactly this kind of scenario. And I want to be clear about what I am doing here. I am not cherry-picking quotes that support my analysis. I am presenting assessments from across the ideological and institutional spectrum, left and right, military and civilian, American and international, and showing you where they converge. Because that convergence is the signal. Mackenzie, the four-star general who oversaw all U.S. military operations in the Middle East from 2019 to 2022, who commanded the response to Iran's January 2020 missile attack on Ain al-Assad, who personally directed the Soleimani strike, has said, and I am quoting from his most recent public remarks, "The Iranian calculus has fundamentally shifted. They are no longer operating within the proxy warfare model that constrained their actions for 20 years. A direct strike on sovereign U.S. diplomatic territory from Iranian soil is a threshold event. It demands a threshold response. Not a proportional response. Not a measured response. A threshold response. That word, threshold, is the word that military strategists use when they mean the old rules no longer apply. Maloney, one of the foremost Iran scholars in the United States, author of multiple books on Iranian political economy, a former State Department policy advisor, noted in her analysis published within hours of the strike. This is not a repetition of the 2020 model. In 2020, Iran struck a military base with advance warning to Iraqi intermediaries who passed that warning to American forces. There was no advance warning here. There was no back-channel communication. The shift from warned escalation to unwarned escalation is the most dangerous single change in Iranian behavior since the revolution. Unwarned. That word carries enormous weight. In deference and escalation theory, warned strikes are designed to communicate resolve while minimizing the risk of miscalculation. Unwarned strikes maximize the risk of miscalculation deliberately, because the attacker has decided that the risk of miscalculation is less dangerous than the status quo. Iran has decided that the status quo is more dangerous than the possibility of a direct war with the United States. Read that sentence again. Hokaim, based in London, connected to defense and intelligence establishments across the Gulf, Europe, and North America, said directly, "The embassy strike collapses the firewall between proxy operations and state action that Iran has spent 4 decades building. Once that firewall is down, it does not go back up. Every future Iranian proxy attack will now be assessed not as militia activity, but as potential state-directed military action. That changes the legal basis, the military response options, and the escalation ladder entirely." When a retired CENTCOM commander, a Brookings Institution vice president, and an IISS senior fellow, individuals with profoundly different institutional perspectives, different political affiliations, different geographic vantage points, all converge on the same assessment, that convergence is the most reliable signal available. The firewall is down. The rules have changed. And the next 48 hours will determine whether anyone can rebuild them. This strike did not happen in isolation. It is one node in a network of simultaneous escalations that are reshaping the security architecture of the entire Middle East. Let me walk you through the 5 dominoes that are already falling. Domino 1. Iraq. The Iraqi government is in an impossible position. Iraq hosts approximately 2,500 American troops under the Combined Joint Task Force, Operation Inherent Resolve, the anti-ISIS mission. Iraq also hosts the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, known in Arabic as Al-Hasht al-Shabi, a coalition of predominantly Shia militias that are formally part of the Iraqi security apparatus, but operationally aligned with Tehran. These are the same groups that have been launching attacks against American forces for over a year. An Iranian missile striking American sovereign territory inside Iraqi borders forces Baghdad to choose. Does Iraq condemn the strike and risk the wrath of Tehran and the PMF, organizations that wield enormous political and military power within Iraq's own government? Or does Iraq equivocate, issue a bland statement about sovereignty that implicitly accepts Iranian missiles overflying Iraqi airspace to hit a target in the Iraqi capital? Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, himself a political figure closely aligned with Iran-backed factions in parliament, has released a statement calling for restraint from all parties. That is not a condemnation. That is not a defense of Iraqi sovereignty. That is a sentence designed to say nothing, because saying anything meaningful would be catastrophic for his political survival. The Green Zone is now under full lockdown. Iraqi security forces have been placed on highest alert. The Baghdad Operations Command has established checkpoints across every major intersection in the capital. And the question that hangs over all of it: is Iraq a sovereign nation, or is it a corridor through which Iranian missiles transit on their way to American targets? Domino 2. The Strait of Hormuz. I have already discussed the economic implications, but let me add the military dimension. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, maintains a continuous naval presence in and around the strait. The aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and its strike group have been operating in the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman region. Guided missile destroyers equipped with Aegis ballistic missile defense systems patrol the strait. Mine countermeasure ships stand ready. But Iran's anti-access/area denial strategy for Hormuz does not depend on naval engagements. It depends on mines. Sea mines. The IRGC Navy maintains an arsenal of thousands of naval mines. Contact mines, influence mines, remotely operated mines, capable of being deployed from fast attack craft, commercial vessels disguised as fishing dhows, and submarine platforms. In the 1988 Tanker War, a single Iranian mine nearly sank the USS Samuel B. Roberts, and the subsequent response, Operation Praying Mantis, resulted in the largest American naval surface engagement since World War II. It took the U.S. Navy months to clear mines from a fraction of the Persian Gulf in 1988. A comprehensive mining of the Strait of Hormuz would take not months but potentially years to fully clear. Domino 3. Lebanon and Hezbollah. Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful and capable proxy, maintains an estimated arsenal of 130,000 to 150,000 rockets and missiles in southern Lebanon, according to U.S. and Israeli intelligence assessments. These range from short-range Katyusha rockets to precision-guided Fateh 110 derivatives capable of striking any point in Israel. An escalation between the United States and Iran does not stay bilateral. Hezbollah's operational doctrine, confirmed by its own leadership in public and private communications, includes a commitment to open a northern front against Israel in the event of a U.S. or Israeli attack on Iran. Hezbollah Secretary General has stated this explicitly. This is not speculation. This is declared doctrine. If the U.S. strikes Iran in response to the embassy attack, the probability of Hezbollah launching a massive missile barrage against Israel, targeting Haifa, Tel Aviv, and the Dimona nuclear facility, increases from a theoretical possibility to an operational likelihood. Domino 4. The Houthis and the Red Sea. Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement in Yemen, has already demonstrated its willingness and capability to disrupt one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. Since late 2023, Houthi forces have launched over 100 attacks against commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, through which approximately 12% of global trade transits. These attacks, using anti-ship cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and one-way attack drones, have forced major shipping lines to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 10 to 14 days to transit times and dramatically increasing shipping costs. A U.S.-Iran escalation would almost certainly intensify Houthi operations. The Houthis have explicitly linked their Red Sea campaign to solidarity with other axis of resistance components. An attack on Iran would provide both the motivation and the Iranian-supplied weapons to expand the target set. Domino 5. The global energy market restructuring. This is the domino that falls last, but falls hardest, and it is already in motion. The International Energy Agency's latest oil market report documents the stark reality. Gulf countries have collectively cut oil production by at least 10 million barrels per day. Flows through the Strait of Hormuz have dropped from approximately 20 million barrels per day to minimal levels. Over 3 million barrels per day of refining capacity in the Middle East has been shut down. IEA member countries have agreed to release 400 million barrels from emergency reserves, a move that buys roughly 40 days of buffer, not 40 months. This is not a temporary disruption. This is a structural shift in the global energy market. Long-term investment flows are being reshaped. Infrastructure priorities are being rewritten. Insurance premiums for tankers transiting the Persian Gulf have increased by over 300%. And every energy-importing nation, from Japan to Germany to India, is being forced to fundamentally reassess its dependence on Middle Eastern crude. The critical question now: which of these 5 dominoes falls next, and how fast? 17 months before this strike, in October 2023, the Hamas attack on southern Israel initiated a cascade of regional escalation that every intelligence agency predicted, but none could prevent. The convergence was visible even then. 12 months before this strike, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the FDD, published an assessment warning that Iran's ballistic missile transfers to proxy forces had reached unprecedented scale and sophistication, and that the logical next step in Iranian escalation doctrine was the direct employment of Iranian military assets against American targets. 6 months before this strike, the Atlantic Council released a policy paper noting that the assassination of senior IRGC commanders by Israeli strikes in Syria had created an institutional imperative within the IRGC for retaliatory action commensurate with the seniority of the officers lost. 3 months before this strike, Chatham House published an analysis observing that the Islamic resistance in Iraq's operational tempo, 13 to 31 attacks in a single 24-hour period, indicated a level of coordination and logistical support that is inconsistent with autonomous militia activity and consistent with direct IRGC operational planning. Every indicator was there. Every warning was published. Every signal was visible to anyone who was looking, and the embassy was hit anyway. The parallel that nobody in Washington wants to discuss is not 2020. It is not Ain al-Assad. It is 1983. Beirut. The Marine barracks bombing. A truck carrying the equivalent of 12,000 pounds of TNT, enhanced by compressed gas canisters, detonated at the battalion landing team headquarters at Beirut International Airport at 06:22 on October 23, 1983. 241 Americans killed, the largest single-day loss of life for the U.S. Marine Corps since the Battle of Iwo Jima. The intelligence warnings were there before Beirut, too, and the response, a brief naval bombardment followed by a withdrawal, set the template for how adversaries perceived American resolve in the Middle East for the next 2 decades. Iran watched Beirut very carefully in 1983. They're watching how Washington responds to this embassy strike even more carefully today. Let me lay out the timeline, as analysts are constructing it right now. Hours 0 to 12, already underway. The U.S. National Security Council has convened an emergency session. The President has been briefed by the Director of National Intelligence, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Secretary of Defense. CENTCOM has elevated its Force Protection Condition, FPCON, to Delta across all installations in the Middle East. Delta is the highest level. It indicates a direct threat of imminent attack. The aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and its strike group are repositioning. Additional B-1B Lancer and B-2 Spirit bombers are reportedly being forward deployed to Diego Garcia and Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Tanker aircraft are being staged. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets, ISR, including RQ-4 Global Hawk drones and RC-135 Rivet Joint Signals Intelligence aircraft, are flooding the airspace over western Iran. The UN Security Council has been called into emergency session. The United States has requested consultations under Article 51, the self-defense provision of the UN Charter. Russia and China have both issued statements calling for maximum restraint, language that, in diplomatic terms, is designed to prevent a U.S. military response, not to condemn the Iranian attack. Hour 12 to 24. This is the decision window. The President must choose between three broad response options. Option A, proportional strike. Target Iranian military assets in Iraq and Syria, IRGC-linked facilities, weapons depots, command and control nodes. This is the 2024 playbook. It signals resolve without attacking Iranian sovereign territory. The risk? It is the exact response Iran has already absorbed without changing its behavior. It confirms that the cost of striking an American embassy is the destruction of a few warehouses in Syria. Option B, asymmetric escalation. Strike targets inside Iran, IRGC ballistic missile production facilities, the Shahid Himmat Industrial Group complex outside Tehran, the missile storage facilities at Tabriz, the IRGC Aerospace Force headquarters. This crosses the threshold of direct military action against Iranian sovereign territory. The risk? It triggers the full activation of the Axis of Resistance Response Protocol. Hezbollah from Lebanon, Houthis from Yemen, PMF from Iraq, all simultaneously. Option C. Strategic patience with force posturing. Massively reinforce the military presence in the region. Move a second carrier strike group into the Persian Gulf. Deploy additional Patriot and THAAD batteries. Establish a naval blockade enforcement zone. Apply maximum economic pressure through secondary sanctions. Wait for Iran to either escalate further, which justifies a larger response, or back down. Each option has catastrophic failure modes. Each option has political consequences that extend far beyond the Middle East. And the decision must be made within hours, not weeks. Hour 24 to 72. Whatever option is chosen, the regional response will be immediate and visible. Oil markets, currency markets, military movements, diplomatic cables, intelligence intercepts. All of these will generate signals that will tell us whether this crisis is decelerating or accelerating. Watch three things. First, Iranian submarine activity. The IRGC Navy operates Ghadir-class and Fateh-class submarines in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. If U.S. naval intelligence reports increased submarine deployments, that is a pre-positioning indicator for Hormuz mining operations. Second, Hezbollah mobilization signals. If UNIFIL, the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, reports unusual movement of Hezbollah fighters toward the blue line on the Israeli-Lebanese border, That is a mobilization indicator for a Northern Front escalation. Third, the price of oil. If Brent crude breaks $130, the market has concluded that Hormuz disruption is not a theoretical risk, but a near-term probability. At that price, the economic consequences of military action and the economic consequences of inaction begin to converge. There is a detail in this story that I keep returning to: the helipad. The missile struck the helipad area of the embassy compound. A helipad, a flat concrete surface, the place where helicopters land and take off. The place where American diplomats, military officers, intelligence personnel are evacuated in emergencies. The exit point. Iran did not hit the entrance to the embassy. Iran hit the exit. I first mentioned this as a physical detail of the strike. But think about what it means as a message. You cannot leave. You cannot evacuate. The door you run toward when everything goes wrong. We can reach it. We can close it. That is not a military target selection. That is a psychological operation embedded in a kinetic strike. And it is the detail that tells you more about Iranian strategic intent than any diplomatic statement Tehran could issue. The helipad. The exit. Closed. What I have laid out today is not a prediction. It is a structural analysis. The variables, the actors, the capabilities, the constraints, the probable sequences. But there is one variable that no analyst, no intelligence agency, no military strategist can predict. And it is the variable that will determine whether this crisis produces a contained exchange or a regional conflagration that reshapes the Middle East for a generation. That variable is judgment. The judgment of a president deciding whether to absorb the most provocative Iranian action in 45 years or to respond with force that could trigger the widest Middle East conflict since 1991. The judgment of an Iranian supreme leader, or whoever is now making strategic decisions within the post-Khamenei IRGC power structure, deciding whether the strike achieved its objective or whether further escalation is necessary. The judgment of an Israeli prime minister deciding whether this moment, with Iran exposed, with the United States politically compelled to respond, is the window to address the Iranian nuclear program that Israel has spent 3 decades preparing for. The judgment of a Chinese president deciding whether to use this crisis to test American resolve in the Indo-Pacific, while Washington is distracted and overextended. 4 leaders, 4 calculations, 4 sets of domestic pressures, institutional incentives, personal ambitions, and strategic doctrines, all converging on decisions that must be made in days, not months. And for every American family whose gas prices, grocery bills, mortgage rates, retirement savings, and economic stability are connected, invisibly but directly, to a missile that an IRGC commander authorized in the dark hours of a Friday morning in western Iran, the consequences of those judgments will not be abstract. They will be concrete. They will be measurable. They will be felt. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. When the next development in this crisis breaks, and it will break, likely within 24 hours, I will cover it the same way I covered this. Evidence first, analysis second. What it means for you, always. One question before you go, and this is the question I do not have an answer to. The question that will define the next decade of American foreign policy. The question that every analyst I have spoken to in the last 12 hours has asked, and none has answered. If Iran is willing to strike the U.S. Embassy, the single most symbolic American asset in the Middle East, what target is off the table? If the answer is nothing, then everything we thought we understood about Iranian deterrence was wrong, and we are starting over.